Muse. It is I, and it is you. It is us. It is we. It is me and my Muse. As it always shall be, as it forever shall be. As it is, as it was, as it will be. I have something I want to talk about with you today, Muse, that is of astronomical importance. It's also something that has been talked about ad nauseum. But I believe that I have a way to communicate this issue in such that people will finally understand it. And I say this because I made a mistake. And I am not above admitting it. Now, this mistake never made it into publication. In fact, it only came about when I began to write this new series for Devil Dog Press. The new book is called Fear, lowercase f, capital E, lowercase a, capital R. Hopefully you can understand the subtlety in that name. So, the other night, I began writing this first chapter in this new book. And I wrote about 1,000 words, maybe 1,200 words, and I called it a night. The next day, something was eating at me. Something in the back of my mind was saying, you screwed up. It wasn't in the characters or the idea of the story. It was in the way I wrote that first part. And in that moment, when I realized that I had made a mistake, it dawned on me. I was telling and not showing. And thus is the lesson for today. We've all heard it. We've been told probably once or twice in our careers to show, don't tell. It's a great Rush song, but I would love to play that Rush song for you, but I have a feeling that I would go up against trademark issues or ASCAP. Is it ASCAP? I think it's ASCAP. Anyway, show, don't tell. Let me explain to you what I did, and then I'll explain to you how I fixed it. And hopefully that will cement the idea, truly, and finally, of what show, don't tell is for those authors out there who may be a little unsure of what it means. Okay, so when I decided to start writing this book, what I wanted to do was I wanted to immediately set up the scene. I wanted it to feel like the reader was dropped into this new world and they immediately understood what was going on. They knew the main character right out of the gate, and they had a little bit of his history that they could consume, and it would carry them forward. So what I did was now the main character is obviously the narrator. I am writing this in first person past tense. So, because I write most of my novels in third person or first person past tense because I feel like it gives an immediacy. So, I wrote the first 1,000 words, and I wrote them in such a way wherein the character, through exposition, set himself up. Now, I'm not going to give away any of the dirty little details of this character because I would rather people discover them in the book. So I'll just make some things up. So I decided, the character is a surgeon. He's a surgeon. That's true. And there are certain elements of this character's past that will dictate how he behaves in the future. So I decided that this character had X personality or X traits, or he was an ex-surgeon, not ex-surgeon. He was a surgeon who focused on this. So, there were certain elements of being a surgeon that appealed to him. And so throughout this first bit of this first chapter, I explain that through the eyes of the narrator, of the character, the main character who happens to be the narrator. And so parts of it were, say, for example, I was married. This is the character speaking, not me. I am married, happily, thank you. The character saying, I was married, and marriage didn't work. and just for the sake of our discussion, Muse, the marriage, let's say, for example, the surgeon was more married to his work than his wife or his spouse. And so I kind of barfed all that information out. And I liked what I wrote. I liked the information that I put forth. I liked the way the character was developing, or the character not developing. I liked the way the character, I liked his personality, and I felt like who he was fit perfectly into this series as the main character. But the problem is the way I laid out this exposition, it was very inactive. It was a character saying, here's some information for you, reader, that you're probably going to need later on in this book. And the problem with that is it's inactive. It doesn't give the reader an opportunity to experience it. It's just told to them. It's like a prologue. It's like, okay, reader, here's some information that you're going to have. Here it is, blah, 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 blah. There's nothing compelling about that. You might be giving out some compelling bits of information, but it's not done in a compelling way. And it wasn't just about the past. I was also trying to set up this world. So the main character was not only saying, I'm a surgeon. This is the kind of surgeon I was. This is the kind of surgeon I am now. This is what happened to bring us to the point where we've started this book. And these are the bad guys that we're facing. That's a lot of information to give out in 1,000 words. On top of which, it's a lot of information to give out in an inactive way. Now, how do we fix that? How do we go from telling to showing? Believe it or not, it's a lot more simple than you think. And my take on this is that it's better to provide important information about the world or the characters by way of another character. So let's just say, for example, that this character, his name's Vega. Now, a little history on that name. I was discussing with my wife that I had to come up with a name for this main character, and I was having trouble because I feel like the names are really important to our characters because they say something about them. And out of nowhere, my wife said, you should name him Vega. And I was like, But the look on my wife's face when she said that told me everything I needed to know. And that everything is, I had to name that character Vega. If only just to honor my wife. So I said, I'm going to name him Vega. His name's Vega. That's it. So the main character in the book is named Vega, thanks to my wife. Anyway, so Vega, to fix this problem, and I'm going to use this one specific example here. So Vega, in the original introduction, Vega says, I was married and my wife left me because I was more married to my work than I was to her. He said that. Okay, so how do we fix that? In the first 1,000 pages, the new first 1,000 pages, there just so happens to be a patient. And while Vega is working on the patient says, so who are you? Doesn't really say that. I'm just giving examples. So he says, who are you? And Vega says, I'm a surgeon. Well, obviously you're a surgeon. You got a knife and you're cutting into me. That doesn't tell me anything about you. Well, I was married. You were married? But you're not married now. No. Why not? Well, I guess I put too much focus on my work. And I kind of left my wife in the shadows. Yeah, I get that. I did the same thing. It's terrible. It's not the way you should treat a spouse. So you see, what's happening there is all of a sudden, instead of a narrator or a character just offering up exposition, it becomes active because we're having a conversation. Here's another example. This part was not in the book yet. I don't know. It might. Who knows? So, and then this actually comes by way of my previous book that's in the hands of beta readers right now, Hopetown. I'll tell you a little bit about that in a second. There's a scene where the main character, Tock, T-O-C-K, is running away from something. He and Angela are running away from something. Now, as they're running, I could have had Tock, in his internal narration, say that I am not in good enough shape to be keeping up with Angela. What am I going to do about that? So instead of using that inactive bit, we make it active by Angela commenting on Tock huffing and puffing. Well, you're sure out of shape. Well, yeah, that's what happens when you lead a life of pleasure and you don't have to do anything. So you make it active. You actively have a conversation between these two characters that brings out that information. Now, it doesn't literally have to be active. They don't have to be running. They could have run and they could have stopped, and then he's bent over with his elbows on his knees, and Angela makes fun of him for being out of shape. That's active. That is an active conversation instead of an internal, inactive bit of exposition. That is showing, not telling. It is active and not inactive. Now, when you make things active and you show them over an inactive telling, you make them compelling for the reader. You make the reader want to be involved in that scene. Because when you make them inactive, especially when you're just barfing up a bunch of exposition in an inactive manner, you put a wall up between you and your readers. There is nothing for that reader to get involved with. It is just them consuming information about a character instead of investing in a situation. And that is truly, I think, from my perspective, that is the difference between showing and telling. And the more you can show, the more active and engaging your book is going to be, and your characters. Because let's face it, it's more interesting to learn something about a character by way of their behavior or by way of their interaction with other characters than it is from simply an internal monologue. We all have those internal monologues, and they are a wonderful thing. I have solved many a problem in a book by way of an internal monologue. I'm as bad as JD in Scrubs with his internal monologues. The only difference is my internal monologues don't tend to have sound effects. I wish they did. I really wish they did. And I wish that my internal monologues were also accompanied by a really cool soundtrack, but it's not. It's just my head, or just my mind, my voice inside my head, walking and talking me through things. That's inactive. If I were to voice that to you, it's inactive. If I were to voice it as things are happening, and we were to have a discussion about it, then we become active. It becomes an active showing of information. So there's my take on show, don't tell. I hope that helps some writers out there to better understand it, because it can be a really complicated piece of information to consume as a writer, especially when you're new. And new writers tend, almost to a fault, to lean on telling and not showing. So that's what's happening in my head right now. And I'm really excited about this new book, this new series. I have no idea when it's going to be done, but I do know that Hopetown is in the hands of the beta readers right now, as we speak. Now, I've had one beta reader finish it, and she said, and I quote, "It's probably the best thing you've ever written," which is interesting because it is so far outside of my usual genre. It has nothing to do with horror or anything like that. It is, for all intents and purposes, it is a romance. It's a quirky one. It's a very, very quirky one. But it also deals with a couple of subject matters that I believe that are important to deal with. And it was also important, this one particular beta reader, it was really important that I get her feedback because one of the particular issues in this she has experienced. And from her perspective, I dealt with it in a very graceful and well, from her perspective, a perfect way. But I'm really excited about this book because it is outside of my comfort zone. And I think it's incredibly important for all writers to venture well beyond their comfort zone because you grow from that. You expand your palette. And I know that I've written a lot of books that have an element of romance in them, but I've never written something that was almost specifically a romance. Now, it's not, I've said this before, it's not your typical romance. Nothing like that. There's no sex. There's no there's no hot man with perfect washboard abs, and the main woman is she's not the typical protagonist in a romance. It's unique. I do believe I can honestly say this is a unique romance, and it's fun and it's quirky and it has a heart. It has a big heart. And that was important for me to include that in this book because it was the driving force behind it in the first place. So I don't know when it's going to be done. I'm still waiting on feedback from a few other beta readers. And then there's the editing process. I have fortunately managed to procure an editor that I trust implicitly. And I've got the cover done, I think. And I'm excited about this book. And there's very little telling. It's all showing. So anyway, Muse, that's what I wanted to talk to you about today. And I hope that you and anyone else who happened to be overhearing this conversation, I hope that they learned something from it. Because I know I sure did. Anyway, thank you, Muse. And as usual, it should go without saying, in fact, that you are awesome.